Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.
Trade in and trade up at Sunbury Motors Kia.
Wanna see ya in a Kia. Sunbury Motors Kia.
From now until the end of the month, Sunbury Motors Kia will give you more. That's right, more than your car is worth. Take advantage of Kia's first ever trade-in assist bonus cash. Get an extra $1,500 on third row 2020 Serenos. There's 22 available with savings up to $7,025. SMC has an extra $1,000 on the versatile 2020 Sportages. There's 27 available with savings up to $4,655. Plus an extra $1,000 on the stylish 2020 Kia Souls with 17 available and savings up to $4,424. The demand for quality pre-owned vehicles is at an all-time high. So stop in Sunbury Motors Kia for your upgrade today. Trade in, trade up at Sunbury Motors Kia on the Strip in Hummel's Wharf.
Retail trade-in assist applies for model year 2000 or newer Kia or competitive model.
Sports talk where your voice counts. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Great to have you with us on the show today, and we've got quite a show for you today. Looking forward to it very much. We're going to have Neil Coulong on the show today, talk about the NFL. We're going to have Dan Baker, who gets to talk to a limited group of people at Citizens Bank Park. It's the public address announcer. So we got him on today. And also Phil Steele at 4:35. Tomorrow on the show, we're going to have Senator Pat Toomey on the show to talk about the Major League Baseball Roundtable. And it's appropriate that we have him on tomorrow because the opener is tomorrow. Doubleheader, or excuse me, we're going to do that. It's only appropriate because Thursday will be opening day with the doubleheader with the Yankees, Nationals, and the Giants and the Dodgers. So we'll have him on, and Rhys Hoskins of the Phillies and Pirates general manager Ben Cherington both happen to be a part of that roundtable. So we're going to get the Senators' thoughts on that and what they said, along with epidemiologists. Even though Matt tries to play one on the radio, we'll actually go with a real one.
Yeah.
And go from there.
Because we want science to trust me.
Yep, I wake up every day with that thought. Yeah.
There's a reason I do this for a living.
It is interesting. The age disparity works very well on this show. Matt's able to really give a viewpoint of someone younger, probably more intelligent, and so forth. And I can tell you what it was like during medieval times. But an area where I can delve into a bit. I think you saw Gabe Kapler of the Giants knelt down yesterday for the national anthem. You're going to see that across the board. The NBA is going to do it. The NBA, they showed the courts today with Black Lives Matter painted on it. What I'm about to say, you have to listen to both parts. Don't just listen to the first part without listening to the second part. Because if you just cut it off the first part, then it's all wrong. When I was 14, it was 1972. There's no need to go back and go, I wonder how old he is now. I'm 62, okay? I could care less how old I am. But when I was 14, it was 1972. 1972 marked the last of the 10 Southeastern Conference teams at the time to integrate. So when I was 13 in 1971, not all the SEC teams were integrated. That didn't happen until I was 14 years old. Now, I never thought about it. I mean, I didn't think about it because I never thought about race. So I never thought about it. Oh, Texas playing the Cotton. To me, it was Texas playing in the Cotton Bowl, and Alabama's playing in the Orange Bowl. Hey, I didn't think about who was playing. But now it's important to look back on those facts and realize, and again, here's the first part, then listen to the second part, because they go hand in hand. The first part is, it tells you in a span of 48 years how far we've come and how much ground has been made up to this point. And look, and I'm taking this almost directly as a quote from the late John Lewis. And what inspired this was Dick Girardi sent me a great picture of Miles Dredd with the late Congressman John Lewis. I remember Miles played at Gonzaga High School in D.C., less than 2 miles away from the Capitol. Great picture of Miles narrowing that gap. But when you're at my age, I remember distinctly the streets in 1968. I remember it distinctly. I was 10. I remember exactly where I was, exactly where I was when Martin Luther King was shot and killed in Memphis. I remember exactly where I was when I heard about Bobby Kennedy being shot and then eventually 24 hours later passing away. I remember all that like it was yesterday. I mean, I think the first time I ever traveled to the South, I think it was the first time I ever traveled south of the Mason-Dixon line, would be in college. My future brother-in-law, who's now my brother-in-law, Brian, and I made a trip down to D.C., and then we went to Virginia to see, he was actually going to St. Francis College at the time in Loretto. And St. Francis was playing George Mason. It was George Mason. And the game took place at Fort Myer in Virginia. That was the first time I was ever south. So I was Maryland, Virginia, D.C. So up until the age of 20 years old, up until the age of 19, I'd never been to the South. Never been there. So everything was about what I saw on TV or read. Had not been there. It was never... I mean, my parents only talked to us about it maybe one time. That was it. Because the attitude in our house was always everybody's the same, right? But, work hard, be loyal. That's what we talked about. And, that's what we talked about. So, but that tells you, again, when I was 14, the last SEC, that's not that long ago to me. Now, see, to me, that's not that long ago. It's 48 years. But if you add up somebody who was born in 1972, Okay? And they're 48 today. Then you take their father, say I think I saw somebody who played football at Alabama whose father he was 50 years old, and his father had him at the age of 50. And his grandfather had his father at the age of 50. Well, his father, doing the math, as he said, my grandfather was the son of a slave. It doesn't take that much lineage to go back. So that's why we've come so far. We still got still got ways to go. And it was the picture that Dick sent me of Miles Dredd with John Lewis that inspired that conversation today. All right, let's get everybody up to date on what else is happening. And let's start with this. We talk about what the NBA is doing with the courts in Orlando. The NFL plans for social justice helmet decals. The Washington football team has hired Julie Donaldson to oversee the broadcasts. She will be part of the Washington radio team, but will not be doing the play-by-play. Replacing Larry Michael. Her first task will be to hire a play-by-play announcer. So that will be her job. And Dan Snyder called her a trailblazing journalist who has worked on multiple award-winning shows and has a passion for sports in the DMV. Okay. Of course, Snyder did that in a press release. Maybe I'll sit down once and take some questions. See how it goes. Then again, maybe that's what they fear. Maybe that's the part they fear, that he might take questions. I don't think we wanted to do that. Would you like to have a $100 million yacht?
I would. But not the end-all, be-all.
Yeah, but you could sell it.
True.
If it's not the be-all, end-all, you could sell it. Let's see, a couple quick notes for you. Penn State basketball allowed to get back into their summer workouts on the floor. I think it's 4 hours a week. Okay, 4 hours a week, something like that. In that range. So they're allowed to make that transition. Penn State football will be allowed to make the transition to the 20-hour-a-week mini camp that includes on-field work on Friday. As of right now, 12 of the 14 schools in the Big Ten are going through voluntary workouts. The only two at the moment that are not are Maryland, Indiana. Maryland had 9 positives. But the 9 positives, and they emphasize this, were not confined to the football team. It was 9 positives among all their fall athletes or staff. So they've paused. We're waiting to see when they go back. Ohio State's already back. They've been back for over a week. Indiana paused football, but that's the only sport they paused. They had 6 positives, and they're all football related. So Indiana football paused, but men's basketball, women's basketball, volleyball, field hockey kept going because they all tested negative. We mentioned that Rutgers announced yesterday, along with the Giants and the Jets, no fans in the state of New Jersey in the fall. Meanwhile, Micah Parsons and Shaka Toney have both been put on the Nagurski watch list as the top defensive player. Micah was expected. I'm thrilled for Shaka. Shaka Toney is one of the really, to me, one of the really great guys to talk to. Beyond the football part, I just personally like him a lot. And I was thrilled to see him get that kind of recognition. We're going to have Phil Steele on the show at 4:35 today. And Phil has Shaka on his third team, all Big Ten. And we're going to talk to Phil about the Penn State football team and the Big Ten in particular in the final half hour. And I think we're going to get Phil back on the show in 2 weeks to then expand it to all of college football. Because at that point, if life continues on the current path, then training camp would be on the verge of starting, if it continues on the current path. But as we mentioned, 12 of the 14 in the Big Ten have continued their voluntary workouts. I'm waiting to see what happens with Indiana and Maryland. I would not doubt that at some point before this week is out, they're back, or maybe the beginning of next week. Then there's one other part that I find interesting. The Big Ten has not announced what it's going to do yet with a schedule. Do you just play the 9 games you have scheduled? Do you add a 10th game? Do you jumble the schedule up? And when I mean jumble it, there's been some thought, and I don't know how accurate it is, but at least it's worth discussing. Would you front-load division games so that you have your division games, in case there's a pause, close to done or done before getting to playing the Western Division teams? And you could also time out your bye weeks in such a way to help.
Taking your calls at 800-795-9565. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And today's show brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Lincoln, Kia, Hyundai, great pre-owned inventory. Fabulous sales staff, terrific service department to take care of the life of your baby. That's your investment. All at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. And online at sunburymotors.com. Okay. Before we get to Neil Coulon, the NBA tested, it's about 350 people, and all of them came back negative, plus, considering they'll be starting shortly. The NHL tested 800, 2 came back positive. Another plus. And, of course, baseball is about 1.2, 1.3%. Yes, among that 1.2, 1.3%, you're going to get somebody like Freddie Freeman, who struggled tremendously. You're going to get somebody like Scott Kingery, who also has struggled with this. And then you're going to get a bunch of people in that 1.3% that, if they weren't tested, didn't know they had it. This virus has so many bizarre twists and turns to it. Well, I think he's been on the show now for 22 years, something like that. It's great to have back Neil Coulon. Neil, welcome.
It's about that, yeah.
Considering the show's in its 9th year.
Hey, I didn't know what I was doing. I figured you guys would put me on the air eventually. I was just going to keep calling in.
Well, it's funny because I was on with Mark Packer on Sirius XM a couple of weeks ago. And I said, long-time listener, first-time caller. you were the first one, I think, on this show to broach the idea of maybe no preseason games. So let's talk about that for a second, Neil. If I were the NFL, and again, I realize they're acquiescing to the players, which I think is relevant and understandable. Okay, but let me throw this theory out to you, because I was talking with John McClain of the Houston Chronicle about this. Why not play one where, okay, Roethlisberger, those guys aren't playing, but you play one to see who's going to make the roster or not, and then you see, I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous guinea pig question, see how it turns out.
That's probably the choice I would have made for that reason. Let's make sure we can iron out the kinks here before this is live. I would say a lot of that would be connected more to the fan experience than anything else. I think whatever it is they figure out with games, they'd need more than one to really get it down if they're ever going to be able to anyway. I mean, they're going to hope to tread water until something clears everything up and they're good to go back to playing the way that they're used to playing.
Sure.
Since that's obviously not going to happen, I would think having a preseason game to determine the fan aspect of it.
Everything from do I pump in crowd noise, how many people do I let in, everything like that, almost like a quote dry run of some sort.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes the most sense. But really, this isn't our first song and dance between the NFLPA and the league.
Right.
They are going to go toe-to-toe on every issue that's out there. And preseason games, I think, is a very attractive chip for the owners to use in exchange for something else. We can get rid of preseason games completely. You have to do this. It's always a back and forth. And I think that the preseason game piece, and I'm not trying to undermine the point that the NFLPA is trying to establish by saying we want to be safe. Nobody could, in their right mind, could possibly think anything about this is safe. Okay, let's get past that. That's just naive. I mean, it's silly to think that you actually think that's a concern. There's nothing safe about what you do without a pandemic around.
Sure.
There are only so many things they're going to be able to do, and when they say things like, "Well, don't do the post-game jersey exchange," guys like Richard Sherman freak out as if that's an actual issue. So don't act as if you think that there's a way to make this safe. What you don't want to do is play preseason games. So, and I don't blame you. So that they're putting the pressure on the owners to bend in certain ways, and that the owners are going to expect some type of submission for that. So all of this is really just a back and forth. I thought it was rather hilarious over the last couple of days, the amount of people who legitimately thought the NFL has done absolutely nothing except sit there and wait until they could establish a training camp and then say, all right, how are we going to do this? They've been working on this for a long time, but much of it, if not all of it, was going to have to be collectively bargained based on the language in the CBA. Mm-hmm. So the owners couldn't do much without the players signing off on it, and they had to have a negotiation, which is what they did. There's a back and forth that goes into everything. I don't think there's a better side here. I think there's just a lot of stuff that they needed to iron out. And to your point, getting back to the original point of all this, I think a preseason game, not for the sake of contact, but think of it more like a dress rehearsal, I think probably would have been a good idea for a lot of things. But if they're not going to do that, they're going to dive right into it. I don't think the fans are going to miss much about the preseason. And I don't know if this season's really going to be a whole lot about the competition anyway. I think it's going to be having the product on the field in whatever manner that is.
Yeah, what's interesting is obviously the NFL is not at the point where they're testing people yet, right? They're not testing anybody. They won't test anybody until they get to camp, correct?
Yeah, they got to get them there.
It's interesting that the NBA just released their numbers from the bubble, and when we had Calvin Booth, the general manager of the Denver Nuggets, on, former Nittany Lion, that's why we had him on, right? We asked, how long do we have to talk? He says, I'm in the bubble. I got all 24 hours if you need it. But they tested 350. All of them came back negative. And in the NHL, I think they tested 800, and 2 came back positive. Major League Baseball has a 1.2, 1.3% positive rate. I found those numbers to be, obviously, these are the best conditioned individuals on the planet, obviously, besides your hosts and and the guest. But I found that to be actually interesting.
I think it fits in line with what scientifically you'd think about with this. They're closed off from outside influence. If that's the case, it's not there. So, yeah, you'd hope that they would test positive. At the same time, these are the kinds of things the NFL needed to see, and they were in kind of a reverse pole position because of that. They were in the best position of the major sports because there was the most amount of time before they had to make any rock-solid decisions on anything.
Right.
They used that time, I feel, to their advantage just to see what's baseball going to do, what's hockey going to do, what's basketball going to do.
Right.
They're all going to come to certain conclusions in a much different way. These are drastically different business organizations. They couldn't all do the same thing, but they can certainly find commonalities of things that work and try to use that as best they can. The real problem with football is the fact that their roster is at least twice as big as every other sport.
That's true.
So that's going to make it much more complicated. You can't have a bubble. If you got a 12-person team, you can have a bubble. When you have a 90-man off-season roster going to training camp, a little harder to find an entire state in which you could, hole up for however long. They're just not going to be able to do that. So they need to figure out a way to keep it down. But at the same time, you have to see a narrow pathway here in which this can all succeed. And if it is that they are contained, they stay disciplined to that, and nobody gets sick, I think they'll be okay. I think we're seeing that with the other sports right now for the reasons that you mentioned. It makes me feel old enough to remember that Calvin Booth is the general manager of a team. I remember watching him when he was there. For a statement like his, I'm stuck in here, you get it, it's funny, but at the same time, that's what's keeping everybody healthy, and that's why they don't have it. So they're not going to get it unless it comes in, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. To me, it's kind of hard to think it's going to stay out forever, but they're able to get underway without any issues. They can really clear up a lot. They can really figure out a lot of how this is working, and maybe make this into a pretty successful model. I wouldn't have said that was even a real possibility 4 months ago. So good for them for what they put into it, and I hope the NFL is able to find similar success.
Yeah. Have the Steelers announced how they're going to go about business? I mean, I guess they check in the 28th, and then how does it go after that?
They haven't really said, but I'll be honest, I don't think we're going to get a whole lot of media access this year. It just doesn't make sense. For a variety of reasons.
Sure.
There'll be some, but they're going to hold them up in their own room. There's not going to be much to really well, I don't know. If they put us up in the press box and we're able to look down on the field, watch practice, that's one thing. As far as the interviews, which is really what training camp is about,
Zoom
from a media perspective, it's probably just going to be Zoom, just like it would now. So it makes you wonder how many media are going to report to this. How many are going to go? I mean, you'll probably get the big ones, but not nearly as much as the regional or the stray individual ones here and there. Most of them can probably do it remotely, and they always broadcast Mike's press conferences whenever he held to speak about anything. Those were always available live, so you didn't necessarily need to be there to hear what was being said. I would imagine they'll probably kind of take note of a lot of that and just shut reporters out if they can't be there. And on top of that, keep in mind that this is unique to the Steelers and only just a few other teams in the NFL. They're not going to have the reporters holed up in a dorm anymore. All these guys live by the stadium for the most part. The media are all there. They're not in Latrobe with nothing to do, not wanting to drive all the way back to Pittsburgh if there's nothing to report on. I would imagine because of that, the Steelers would be more inclined to close things off and just tell them ahead of time, this won't be open. Players aren't going to speak. You can't speak to anybody in the locker room. We're going to have a Zoom call. Give us the names of the people that you want to talk to, and we'll let you ask questions in order. They'll probably have something like that. But to this point, I haven't seen anything procedurally on what they plan to do.
All right. Is there anybody on the Steelers that you know of with pre-existing conditions that may be a question mark about whether or not they want? Because I'll tell you the one, if there's one area of this where if I'm the Players Association, it bothers me. And that's the August 1st opt-out. That date needs to be further back. That date needs to be a little more flexible to me to show some empathy would be the wrong word. We'll go sympathy because, empathy would mean that somebody in the office has the same condition. some sympathy toward the player in their particular instance plate, whether it's home, personally, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I wouldn't know which side would want that date to be pushed out or pushed up. It seems that that's the compromise. I don't know. I mean, I guess what the stance is that you either like it or you don't. We want to move on as quickly as we can. You can't stay here, hold us hostage for 2 weeks, and then leave. There's a lot that goes into it, but I think the opt-out is really for comfort. I don't feel right about this. This isn't going to work. I don't like the way this is going down. I can't do this. I got to get out of here.
Right.
They've also negotiated the idea of a variety of different lists that a player can be put on if and when they were to contract this for the sake of their well-being, for the sake of their contract, the financial compensation that they're scheduled to get if they do get this. At that point, I would imagine what they don't want is for a guy to say, I'm opting out because now I've got this. You owe me, my year's salary. They're trying to find a way to get the guys that don't feel right about it out as quickly as possible. And I think that, it sounds kind of brutal, but I think that's in the best interest of everybody because, frankly, that's one more live host that can, draw in the virus and infect everybody else. If you don't want to be here, you shouldn't be here. We shouldn't have as many. We should only have the amount of people that we absolutely need to be able to do this here. If you're on the fence about it, we'll give you some money. Just, thanks. We'll toll your contract and we'll see you next year. I think that's probably the only realistic way to do it. But I agree with you that there's an optics issue here. Imagine that, in the NFL, they do things that people, look down on them for doing. I don't know if there's a better way to do it. I don't know if it can be pushed back any later than that.
To be honest with you, though, Neil, I think if you're going to carry 53 players, including, whatever taxi squad there may be, I think you've got options. You want to opt out at this point? Guess what? Now you're in that grouping. We'll put you on that list, but he's going to play.
Yeah. It's a lot of it. I would bet for the owners, and I'm not speaking for them. My bet would be the ability to manipulate that to get away from an injury. If they're going to opt out, what they're saying is this contract year will not count for you, and it counts next year. So if there's a player with a lingering injury or gets hurt in camp, they can say, I opt out. This year doesn't count for me. Whereas if you're on injured reserve, it does count. So it's more, I think, defense against manipulation. And I'm not suggesting that players would do that, in a destructive way. I'm not saying they're actively trying to hold one over on the owners. But they'd be in a position to do that, and that in and of itself, especially with the way that the finances in the league are going to get hurt through all of this, which is going to greatly affect the salary cap for next year. They're not able to take on any contracts outside of what is to be expected for something like this, pulling into next year. With that, I don't know what the right amount of time is. Maybe it's 7 days, maybe it's 14, maybe it's 3. I'm sure they negotiated that to some degree, and I'm sure the players who want to opt out would do so sooner rather than later. Right. So, you really should be able to make that decision in 3 days versus 14. I could see that argument being made.
I just think we're in unusual circumstances, and that brings with it unusual decisions.
Absolutely. There's no precedent for this at all in any way. So we have to keep that in mind. I mean, I would tell anybody, go into the season with an open mind because you're going to see something completely different than what you're used to. This, in many ways, it's anti-everything that the NFL has done to this point. It was not built for anything like this at all. So I think that's going to go straight down to the product on the field as well.
And no, I was not alive during the Spanish flu, okay?
Exactly. It's very possible that a team loses its entire offensive line for week 1. So if that's the Chiefs, for example, Patrick Mahomes is going to be out there against 3 guys that they just pulled off the street somewhere. They replaced 2 other guys that tested positive before they got into camp. You could have 5th-rate players on the field. That's very possible. Right. That's going to mess with a lot of things. I think we're going to see a really interesting year.
As always, appreciate you very much, Neil. Thanks so much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, guys.
And for the 22 years you've been on the show.
All 22 of them. I've counted each one with a sense of pride and honor, and I appreciate the time that you guys have given me.
It's the first person ever on the show to say that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, guys.
John McClain, Houston Chronicle, next on ESPN Radio. And coming up, in fact, we're going to have Dan Baker coming up. And then in the final half hour, it is going to be the great Phil Steele. In the final half hour. Looking forward to it. Phil will be another one of those home run deals here. I'm looking forward to that very much. All right, take a break. Come back with more in a moment. Brought to you by Sunbury Motors on News Radio 1070 WKOK.